I've got people. Yeah, we've got people here already.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to hang up right now.
Okay, Jeannie, thanks.
Bye. Hello.
Hi, Jeannie. It's
Hey,
Steve.
how are you, my darling?
I'm doing well. You're in San Francisco, huh?
I'm hanging out on the old bridge. Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Thinking of jumping off, quite frankly. Yeah.
God. Hey, how are you holding up in Arizona? It's so crazy there.
It's horrible. Now, are you just attending this one for giggles?
Which one? The sun.
This is am I looking at the wrong thing?
So this is supposed to be the one on like social justice, supervision, consultation.
Yeah, but are you a panelist?
No. I'm just like.
So you're here just for fun.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to make you a co-host. Nah.
Here, I'll start my video so you can see me.
Hi, love.
Hey.
So good to see you.
I realized I was like being sort of rude. I was just having my.
I know. My hair keeps going weird because of this weird thing.
Well, in fact, I told my wife, it's like, okay, you got to give me a trim today, so that for tomorrow when I'm like hosting, then I might have to be,
It's so good to see you. How are you doing? How are you liking your new gig?
That's worked out well. It really has. I mean, it was crazy. We had 2 days notice when everything like fell apart. It was just. I mean, I was there in a meeting. We were talking about, well, what happens if it closes, in a couple of months? And then it was just, it was like during the end of the meeting, Bob comes in and says, it's Friday. And so my son was there on spring break, and he was actually the first Chicago school hire. Heather hired him because I was just telling him he was just going to have to do it. And she said, no, but we'll hire him as a contractor. But we had to move like 2 or 3 minivans full of files and everything. We had to be out of there by the following week. And so we had moved all the training files. So the program we moved into had 80 students, and we added 320.
Oh my gosh.
And they had 6 faculty, and we added like, I don't know what it was, 14 or something. So it's still been crazy. In fact, I was just sitting here doing program grids for transfer students.
Yeah.
But it's
We're
worked
all multitasking. I swear that's the nature of the world.
Yeah.
That you heaven forbid that you should do one thing at a time.
Well, but yeah, no, it's worked out well. And it's and then with all the craziness of coronavirus and everything, I mean, we've been luckily, knock on wood, been safe. And I've got 2 guys in college and 1 in high school.
Oh, everybody's growing up.
I know.
I have my 5 granddaughters, so it's just us friends because I see a little Miss Megan there. Yeah. So the twins are 6.
Yeah.
6. The littlest Angel is 2, and then my oldest is a sophomore. No, she's going to be a junior in college, and her sister's going to be a freshman in college.
Yeah. So are you able to see them? Because that's the frustrating thing I know for many grandparents and others is this whole notion of like, do you get into the bubble or not in the bubble, and then what if the kids are like also sometimes seeing other people, and it's so difficult.
Yeah, all of my kids are having trouble with the homeschooling, and it's horrible what people are having to go through.
It's so, I mean, it's not that it's great, but it's so much easier for, like my guys are in college, or my daughter's, she's in high school. And even though, it was like a bummer, like this year we would have been visiting colleges.
Yeah.
It's so much harder, I think, for like elementary age kids and stuff like that. It's just, it's so much more difficult to try to, put the material online, and the teachers aren't used to it. And
right.
So.
I have a friend who has 1 grandson who is, needless to say, the soul of her life. I mean, just everything, right? So she's got money, and both his parents have to work, and somebody has to homeschool this child. So they decided, grandma and a master's, and we'll have Grammy do it. And Grammy said, no, he hates me. he rants and raves and carries on, and I'm hiring a tutor. So she hired a full-time tutor to take this kid who is in second grade. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. But yeah, because she didn't want to be in conflict and fighting with him all the time.
Well, that I could understand. Yeah, 'cause I mean that's like it's a it's the same way like when I was teaching my kids to ski. I didn't. I hired because I was like, okay, it was clear it was not going to work.
Yeah.
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 I
But yeah, somebody else. Yeah. So my daughter's high school's gone virtual. So on the DC area, all the high schools are now virtual. It sounds like for the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know in Arizona, I saw something in the paper just the other day about a local mayor there that his dilemma was that if he doesn't start on like August 17th or something, he loses 5% of his budget in person. But he doesn't know how he can start because he's already amongst his staff and teachers. He's had a number of positive cases and stuff. And
yeah, Arizona's horrible. It's not as bad as Florida, but it's pretty horrible. Yeah. So I don't know.
So
I'm just hunkered down. We didn't change anything basically from the sheltering in place and behaving and all that stuff.
Yeah.
We're still doing that.
Yeah, that's with the same thing, always making sure we wear masks and stuff. And the only thing we've done is gone to Vermont once, and we're about to go up there again now. But
nice.
And we have to get tested to go to Vermont too. So to get into the state, you either quarantine for 2 weeks in state, or you have to basically get a negative test.
Wow.
But the whole state of Vermont has 2 people in the hospital with COVID.
You're kidding.
No,
wow.
That's it, 2. And if you want testing, they have testing everywhere, for free.
Sounds like they're doing it right.
Hello, Dr. O'Banion.
But it's one of those socialist, countries.
Yeah, right. Let's see how blue Vermont really is, shall we?
Yeah, it's one of those Bernie places, and so. Yeah, they're the other thing that is like, well, yeah, geez, what are the countries that are doing well? Let's see, New Zealand, Iceland, Germany's doing pretty well. What do they all have in common? It's like they're all run by women. I know. No, Iceland had the highest rate.
I'm taking credit for all of that. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
on behalf of my gender.
It's true though. Iceland is amazing.
Yeah.
It really is.
We were supposed to go because my son had a study abroad, which got canceled, but we may still go. I mean, we'll see. I mean, next year, and obviously not this year. But yeah, and then, my brother lives in New Zealand. So we were hearing, I mean, when they closed down totally. I mean, it was an absolute shutting down of everything. And so I was particularly from his son to my, what is he, a nephew, and he's basically a solo parent with 2 kids. And, and he was, having to homeschool. There was no going out and stuff. But now, what am I getting? I'm getting videos of them surfing or more recently snowboarding. And, because they're now totally open because they have, like basically no cases in the whole country. Yeah. Oh, well.
Not here.
No. So how are you doing, Megan? Doing well?
I am. I mean, I think it came up in the dean's meeting we just had that, I'm more tired because my whole life is in this little virtual box, right? And because we're all, I'm at home, as many of us are, work life and home life are just one big gigantic amorphous thing that is, I have on good days, I do really good at compartmentalizing and really saying, okay, this is done. Now we're back at home. but it's hard. I actually feel, what's been really interesting is that when I was in my office before, there was a bit of a buffer for good and bad. There was a bit of a buffer between, people kind of accessing me to be able to kind of solve whatever problem is happening. And now that access is just universal. There's no longer a buffer. I used to have, an assistant. I had an office where there was like a waiting room, and, so there's physical buffers and also kind of administrative buffers. And now it's just, you can get me through my phone and through my email and through Zoom, and I have Zoom office hours. And so I'm very accessed.
Yeah.
And that's good and bad. I like knowing what's happening and being there for people. But I think that it definitely is more challenging in terms of what I can get done in the day and what weight I'm left with each day.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you would think, oh, you're so much more efficient because I don't have like travel time and all this kind of stuff. But I don't feel like I'm more efficient. I feel like I'm busy always.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like it's, it isn't like, oh, I've got that 2 hours extra of a day that I would be commuting.
No, I don't feel more efficient. I mean, I think that I wouldn't say that. Well, it depends. Some of my work days are longer, but and part of that is the accessibility. Like somebody pings me and I can hear it, and I'm still at home. Whether before it was in my office, but I don't feel I'm more efficient because so much is through Zoom, and I don't have downtime to be able to actually work on projects as efficiently as I was before. So that's I think that takes management and learning on my part too, but. As soon as I'm off Zoom, I want to be off the computer.
Yeah.
Period. So.
Yeah. I've worked at home for, I don't know, it's about 25 years.
Yeah.
And I feel, and I still feel very strongly that working from home is much more efficient in many, many ways than working in an office, but not now. Not with this. This is a whole nother level of distraction and burnout, and it's quick. The burnout is really fast. I don't do Zoom like you guys. I haven't had to do that. In fact, I don't know much about it at all, but I don't find it efficient at all.
I wonder what the difference is, because I agree with you, Jeannie. Like I had built into my contract work from, telecommuting, work from home days, because commuting to the city is really challenging. So it was built into my contract originally, and I had those work from home days before COVID, in the before times. And I was really efficient. I got more done on that day than I probably did in 3 days. And that has totally shifted. And I'm trying
I don't exactly know why. I just know it is. It's like I had one whole day where I just had, which y'all have it all the time, back to back meetings.
Yeah.
And I was, this person doesn't like to be seen, so we did it on the phone, and this one wants to be on Zoom, but I got through the end of the day, and it was like 5.5 hours, and I hadn't done a damn thing. Mm-hmm. All I've done, I added to my to-do list, which is always spectacular. It got longer, but nothing got done. And I don't know. It's crazy.
The other thing is that, when this first happened, what is it now? 5 months ago? I thought, oh, well, I'll be really good and I'll exercise every day and I'll do it because I've got this extra time because I'm not commuting. And that has not happened. I've not been, I find it harder to do that.
These are in a tremendous time suck. And they not only suck your time, they suck your energy. They hurt your eyes, you get a headache. At the first, I think it was all energizing. Oh, we got to see each other and look how it's a new toy. And, that probably lasted, 3 days more? I mean, it was like the newness wore off pretty quickly, I think. The new shiny toy thing. I don't know.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know if I had the new shiny toy ever, because we went from 1 week on ground to the next week without break being virtual.
Yeah.
So it wasn't shiny toy. It was like, okay, how are we going to do this? And of course,
Yeah.
I was in the midst of teaching assessment classes too. So I was sort of like, how do we change our competency exam so it can be done virtually? And um, but yeah, no,
it's fascinating.
it is strange times.
Strange times. Yeah. It's good to see you though, Steve.
Well, thank you.
I like seeing, I will say that it's nice to see all the, in the Deeds meeting, seeing all the faces that I haven't seen for a while that I've been, chatting with, but I haven't seen for a while. It's really nice.
I was glad to see a little like promo for the conference that at least it didn't say, that it had made the call that it's going to be exclusively online or something, that there's like a place, so who knows what the world will be like, but
who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that APA survey of like, would you feel comfortable being a site visitor in the current atmosphere? And it's like, yeah, and you're going to get me a private jet?
Yeah, it's flying is an issue, huh? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm not.
I wouldn't fly now. I mean, it's like, we're going to Vermont, but we drive to Vermont. It's like, yeah, I would feel very leery about flying. The airports, well, I mean, again, it varies so much. I mean, I don't know what it's like in your places, but Vermont was pretty good about wearing masks everywhere. Generally it's okay-ish, but it varies some, and again, what you see when you see people doing things, like the wonderful things like to wear the mask over the chin, it's like,
Yeah,
that's like real helpful. I was really worried about getting coronavirus from your chin. So yeah, I would trust like airports, just plane travel in general. It's so easy to get, sick. With it, whatever. A couple of years ago, if you were traveling a lot by air, your chances of coming down with a cold or something was high. It seemed like.
Yeah, all true. Jeannie, I'm loving that you're here in San Francisco with me right now, based on your background.
I am. I had to do something about the lighting, so that was so classy. I have brown paper all stuck up on my windows behind me, which makes me look like I'm living in a homeless, cardboard box type of deal. So I decided to go virtual.
Hi, Jude.
Hey there. I just, I was making lunch for my boys. It was like a macaroni and cheese explosion happened in my kitchen just now. So I'm just cleaning up. I don't know how macaroni and cheese gets into corners of the kitchen, but it sure did. They did it.
Successful.
Good. Yeah. Hey, Jeannie. Good to see you.
Hello, Jude. So I have, according to my wonderful piece of paper here, all your co-hosts, all your peeps are here, right?
It looks like it. It looks like Brenda is here,
Megan,
and Megan. So, yeah.
All right. Well,
there's Miss Brenda.
I'm going to go silence myself off. And anyway, good to see everyone.
Great. Oh, there's Michelle. Good deal.
Hi, Lucas.
Hello.
So Jude, while you're presenting, I'll be trying to keep track of the chat for you, because I know you're co-host, but I know you won't be able to do that while you're presenting.
I appreciate that. I can hardly do two things at once, but I appreciate that. Great. Well, hi. So let's go ahead. I think it's about time, yeah? 12:29. Maybe we'll wait another minute or two before.
We got folks popping on in.
People trickling in.
Loring, hi. This is just my time. I know you're all supposed to be doing something content oriented, and fancy schmancy scientific and all of that. It's just my time to say hi.
Hi, great to see you. I like your background.
Yes. This is called Fantasy 101 because it's 117 here. Yeah. Yep. So, hello everybody. Cheryl, I can't. Oh, there's my Kelly. My Kelly. Hi, Cheryl. I won't do this for long, I promise.
Keep
I
doing
do-
it. Great.
I do know how to behave.
I'm loving it.
Yeah?
I don't think I can. I've never thrown kisses on Zoom before, so maybe.
And it's all being recorded for posterity.
Do it. Do it, Jude. Do it. Now's your chance.
At the end of this session, I will throw kisses. That's a good intro. Well, okay, it's 12:30, my time at least, so I think it's time to start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As co-host, I just want to say a couple of things. One is if everyone can mute themselves, and we will have about 15 minutes, if it all goes well, 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this session for questions and answers. So go ahead and if possible, save it till the end. And I think we'll do our best to end on time. And I think that's it for co-hosting. So I want to welcome you to this presentation. You are in the Integrating Social Justice into the Curriculum, and we're going to cover the topics of diversity, supervision, consultation, and interdisciplinary management. And I am really excited to be joined by Dr. Megan O'Banion and Dr. Brenda Nash. So each one of us will go over our domain for about 15 minutes. And really what we're doing is we're taking a couple pieces, or one piece in my case, of the work we did in the winter in our work groups as far as social responsiveness matrix. And we're sort of pragmatizing it and showing here are some ways that you can pursue that learning goal or that developmental stage in the classroom with students in your program. So I think just to honor my time, I'll go ahead and share my screen and start my portion of the presentation. Megan and Brenda, anything I forgot before I switch to rambling for a little while? Okay, great. Okay, now I've always learned lessons from Zoom is to make sure that I have a desktop clean before I share my screen with all of you. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Oh, you can kind of see the picture. How is this? Everybody see this okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Good, good. Okay, great. All right. So my portion is around diversity. So this question of how do we integrate some elements of social responsiveness into diversity courses? And so the learning goal for today is that I'll just try to introduce to you some pragmatic ideas for how to do this in diversity courses. And so one of the pieces that we worked on in our work group was a pre-practicum knowledge domain. And we were saying that we wanted our students to understand how oppression is related, current oppression and contemporary oppression is really related to a history of colonialization. And that was fairly new as a general topic, and I haven't particularly seen clearly colonialism and decolonization being an overt and articulated part. So I was really excited to see that come out of our work group. So what I'll be doing is just introducing you to the way that I have tried to do this in some of my classes. So I am the chair of the PsyD program at Antioch in Seattle. And so our self-study is due at the end of this month. And we had the courage to assert a program-specific PWC. And so our 10th competency is going to be around social justice, because that's kind of an anchor of our program. And so for us as a program, we're saying that we want students to be able to communicate the awareness of historical and institutional and systemic structures of power, privilege, and oppression. And then we want them to also be able to apply in some way their awareness of their own social location and historical oppression in their clinical work and in their research. So this is an example of the language that we've used for our PwC. So I'll be talking specifically about an assignment that we have our students do in my class, Social Justice and Cultural Competency. There's 2 quarter classes. The first class focuses on broad concepts like the knowledge domain, if you will, of social justice and cultural competency. And then the second class focuses on clinical application. So the course description is here, and this is really, I'm just trying to articulate to the students, we're in the first class, we're looking at knowledge, and we talk specifically about these ideas of dynamics of power and privilege, globalization, colonialization, and the influence of capitalism. And so that's kind of a novel, I think, thing to overtly say and cover in a course. And I've been doing this for about 8 years, and I constantly kind of struggle to figure out how am I going to kind of concretize this idea, and what am I going to have students doing. So and then, sorry, I'm just going to introduce to you, these are the some of the books that we use in my course. And so specifically for today, when we're talking about a historical framework or context, I really have them, even though some of them probably read this, I have them read Howard Zinn. And that provides the students with just this sense of a historical kind of perspective and context before they get into the assignment that I'm going to have them do. So the assignment, for the lack of a better name, is termed the ISMS paper. And it comes in the first year. These students are all first year, probably second or third quarter in the program. The ISMS paper is fairly notorious in our program. Everyone has their stories, sometimes kind of nightmarish stories about the ISMS paper, because I usually have them revise it a couple times. But the basic idea with the ISMS paper is that they need to choose an ism, let's say like racism or sexism, and then they need to apply it within the context of a specific system. And then they need to, and we'll go through this, but then they need to kind of cover and make a clear, substantiated academic argument for how, in fact, this ism manifests itself within a system. So what I'm hoping here is, one, that the students can start to clearly articulate what an ism is, and then 2, using clear, concrete, substantiated data and analysis, then talk about and make a clear case for how that ism is actually manifest. So it's not just the talking about something, and it's definitely not the opinionizing about something, or talking about how they think racism or sexism is wrong and they never do it and that kind of thing. Instead, what I'm wanting them to really do is be able to clearly articulate how it does exist and how we can see it as kind of the first step, really, in thinking about how then do we address these kinds of problems. So as you'll see here, I ask folks to kind of define what the ism is, the historical genesis, things like that. And actually this next slide, which I'll shift to now, is this is sort of the rubric for the assignment. And so the first one is I ask them to define what the ism is, and they need to go out into the literature and find the definitions and sort of reconcile the differences between them. They need to have a nuanced understanding from multiple points of view. So when we look at, let's say, first I'll get to the historical genesis of the system. So first they need to define it. Second, they need to go back into history and track how did this ism progress over time. where did it come from? What's the etiology, if you will, or the origin story of it? Now, of course, there's no correct answer for a lot of that, but I want them to struggle in going back and really kind of finding what that is and giving us a sense of the progression and how it's manifest throughout different phases of history. So this is a lot of times this is new for students. They're used, when they're talking about isms, they're really used to talking about contemporary issues. And what I'm wanting them to do is kind of go back. And this is really where, in this section, students start to become more aware of the legacy of colonization and how that, in a way, in itself, we're also reading some Frantz Fanon and other books, and we're kind of exploring the idea of how the industry, if you will, or mechanism of colonization really in some ways created these constructs of whiteness and blackness and different things around gender, these binaries that we work with now. So then I ask students to then take a look at the cultural norms and values that sustain the maintenance of this system. And so this starts to get into ideas of rugged individuality or meritocracy, or these sorts of norms that that are kind of permeate our dominant discourse in the way that we think and work and believe. And I want the student to start questioning those sorts of what I call instruments of disconsciousness that we use to perpetuate these sorts of ideas. And then I'm asking them to take a look at the characteristics of affected groups. And really the core part here is not just for them to focus on the victims, quote unquote, of this kind of system. I also want them to focus on those who benefit. And that seems to be a struggle for a lot of students. They can talk about how this hurts folks, but they have a harder time talking about how this actually benefits folks. And probably because all of us are benefit from the system, right? And I think we're more comfortable as helpers, especially early on in their program, seeing themselves as a helper, helping other people, versus taking a look at how they're benefiting from this maybe colonizing system. And then finally, we take a look at the analysis of the psychologist as a possible agent of oppression. So taking all of these things into account, I then have the student write about how they see psychology fitting in to this whole kind of story that they've written, and verify, if so, how psychology has been involved in injustice. And then finally, really taking a look at how they want to embody the role of a psychologist and what they want to do in the future. So I'm just trying to then kind of shift their focus from the past to where they are in the present, how they're situated, and then kind of their goals for being a psychologist. So as you can probably see, this is a lot. I'm asking a lot of a first year student. And this assignment could be asking a lot of any year student or any of us really. But it does, I think, help get to this idea of colonization and the legacy that we're still in today. So some of the recent papers, these are just examples of ISMS papers from the last class that I did. So some examples are Cowgirls Seen and Unseen, the exclusion and objectification of women in the rodeo, which was a great presentation, lots of fun video that we saw. Another one is Social Class in the Classroom, how classism impacts the college experience of low-income students. A Woman's Place, Sexism in the Restaurant Industry. Racist Portrayals of East Indians in Hollywood, Origins and Consequences, and Ageism in the Healthcare System. So as you can see, there's different isms, but we're choosing different systems. And a lot of times the students will basically try to choose a big system. And what I have to work with them on is honing it down to a manageable analysis, if they will. So that's just one example of how I do it. I'm more than welcome to share more, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me when needed. So I think I am right on time, which is very uncommon. So you're welcome, everyone. And I think I'm going to hand it over then to Dr. O'Banion. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
All right. Thank you all.
I'm just going to share my screen. And let me just make sure I minimize you guys here. Hang on a second. All right, let's try this. Okay, can you see my presentation, everybody? Okay, I'm gonna make it bigger, so don't worry about that. It's happening right now. Okay, all right, how does that look for everybody? Okay. Okay, great. So my portion of the presentation today, and as usual, I have far too many slides, but my goal here is that ultimately we'll be sharing all the presentations with all of you, so it'll serve as a resource. So I'm going to go through some things a little quickly, but all the content will be there for you for review. So my portion is really looking at how do you integrate social justice into the curriculum related to consultation and interprofessional interdisciplinary skills development. So when I kind of go back in time and we think about January 2020 and our social responsiveness training matrix work group, there were 4 key overarching takeaways that we had in talking about what is a socially responsive supervisor, consultant, and interprofessional team member. And primarily those 4 kind of key attributes were self-awareness, privileging and empowering minoritized voices, advocating for others through supervision, consultation and interprofessional skills, and then changing and challenging systems. And so throughout, just as a point of reference, throughout this presentation, you're going to see a bit of an abbreviation because consultation and interprofessional interdisciplinary skills is a bit of a mouthful. So you're going to see CI, P/ID throughout, just to kind of truncate it a little bit. Your next, sorry, now all of a sudden I'm not, here we go. So you are able to today, based on my presentation, hopefully you're going to be able to integrate social justice competencies within those illustrated for consultation and professional skills, as well as organize and developmental learning activities that really promote socially responsive consultation and professional skills that incorporate those 4 overarching socially responsive attributes that we identified last winter. So if we think about and we look at the standards of accreditation in terms of the profession-wide competencies, SOA and COA really identify consultation and interdisciplinary skills as being focused on collaboration with professionals, knowledge and respect for roles and perspectives, knowledge of consultation models and practices, and application of this knowledge in direct and simulated consultation. APA in 2017 actually broke this down a little bit more in identifying 11 general consulting psych and organizational consulting competencies that are detailed here. You see ethics, you see kind of personal domains, content knowledge domain, procedural domains. But what I like about this, and I use this in a lot of my classes, is that it allows for us to really look at level specific competencies, knowledge, skills, and attitudes at the individual level, group level, and organizational system level in which we have our students actually engaging as consultants or working on interprofessional teams. This slide is just a resource because I think it really breaks down, it's actually from Guillet, and it really breaks down those different level specific competencies with more detail related to knowledge and skills. And of course, when we think about interprofessional practice, The Interprofessional Education Collaborative in 2011 really did a deep dive in developing domains, these 4 key domains for interprofessional collaboration that really focus on teamwork, team-based practice, communication practices, roles and responsibilities associated and related to collaboration, as well as values and ethics. And I'm going to unpack this a little bit more as we move through the presentation. So when I review all the competencies that are associated with consultation, interprofessional practice, it's clear, of course, that it's essential that we really take into consideration and we integrate really multiple levels of culture, socio-political, and ecosystemic phenomenon. The challenge is that there's so much model variability. So consultation models and interprofessional practice models vary in the degree in which they integrate sociocultural factors. And this is particularly noteworthy when we're looking at and we're thinking about training socially responsive consultants, because these key explanatory variables really could help clarify why organizational problems emerge, right? What helps them persist, those problems persist, and then the difficulty these organizations, groups, and individuals, how the difficulty they have in terms of implementing change. So the takeaway from that is that it's critical for us in our training programs to have a better sense of how we integrate such considerations into consultation and in professional interdisciplinary skills, teaching and applied practice. So immediately I think about Constantine and Constantine's review of 9 specific social justice competencies that were really developed in 2007. And so 6 of them are really applicable to consultation and in professional practice, and also reflect those 4 key attributes that we talked about and came away with from the winter. And those really are, as Jude was also really talking about, this core knowledge about various ways oppression and social inequities can be manifested in our work as consultants, as on interprofessional teams, and ongoing critical reflection about our own kind of race, ethnicity, oppression, power, and privilege, and how that manifests and is replicated within our work and in the systems we consult with, as well as identifying interventions and programs that are aimed at addressing the needs of marginalized voices and communities, and partnering in a way that promotes trusts and also minimizes power differentials. And lastly, developing system interventions or group-based interventions and advocacy skills that really promote social change within these settings that we're consulting to, whether they're communities, whether they're organizations or larger groups. So to add to that, those are really clear social justice competencies, but there's some additional missing elements when I look at the literature. And I leaned into Goodman, Falakov, and Parham, primarily because I wanted to draw from feminist and multicultural principles that really include focuses on things like sharing of power, giving voice, facilitation of social consciousness raising, building on the strengths of the individuals and groups and organizations we're consulting to, and then providing tools that really empower those that we consult to towards social change. Furthermore, I think it's critical that embedded in competency and how we evaluate the competency of our students is that we have to have them skillful in applying multicultural and ecosystemic frameworks for consulting, and so that the folks we're consulting with actually can construct meaning within their setting. That's really a key takeaway for our clients. And then finally, using appropriate and multicultural relevant tools for assessment and evaluating outcomes, while also recognizing a cautious application to marginalized communities. So taking Constantine, Goodman, Falakov, and Parham, I think that what actually ended up working really well for me and in my classroom in teaching socially responsive consultation in professional practice is that I took Flores. Flores did a really beautiful job of identifying cultural competencies in social justice and then overlaying it on consultation activities that really, again, kind of focuses on development of self-awareness, consciousness raising, and giving a voice and power. So overlaying on Flores, kind of adding some of those other key knowledge and skill attributes that you really see that are essential for our students in developing their work as consultants and interprofessional team members. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I think what I want to highlight is that some of the skills, again, are focusing on those 4 overarching attributes that we identified in winter, which is around reflection, which is around understanding limits of knowledge, which is around making sure that we are valuing others and that we are empowering minoritized voices and we're challenging the systems in which we're working. Those are key aspects to both self-awareness and consciousness raising activities. And furthermore, for sharing power, giving a voice, it's important for our students to really understand what those concepts, those principles and concepts and methods are in terms of being a consultant. How do you share power, give voice? And how are you focused on strength-based models and implementing them in your interventions? As well as, of course, understanding of knowledge and practices related to consultation and multiculturally relevant assessment tools that you're utilizing. So what does this look like in the classroom and in your curriculum? How do we advance a socially responsive consultant or interprofessional team member? And I think about how we do that is that we first kind of take our students from the ground up and we think about how do we help them really understand what advocacy is, what justice is, and what system change is within that role of being a consultant and interprofessional team member. And so I talk a lot about, and I think it's important for us to talk a lot with our students around, how do we help them understand what it is to be socially responsive, to be aware, to be competent, to create social cultural safety, and what truly is it to be an advocate. And so I often will highlight these foci and behavior and implement it into different activities, helping our students reflect on and then demonstrate their movement from awareness all the way to advocacy. So, looking at differences and then ultimately looking at how are our students engaging in professional action that is focused on inclusion and equity that then includes non-dominant groups as a part of their development of interventions and initiatives. I also think about justice and helping our students really understand justice. And so I borrow from social psych quite a bit. And I create this, I bring in this overarching framework to help them really understand issues of justice within organizational structures. So I help them understand distributive justice, procedural justice, and interactional justice. And I do this through oftentimes role play or simulation or case study. And so a good example of an activity would be to help students really understand interactional justice. So that level of justice that involves perception of how people are being treated in interpersonal exchange and allocation and levels of power and authority within a system or within a group or between individuals. And then I take them from that understanding of interactional justice and shift them towards a more general framework of distributive justice with a primary emphasis on kind of higher level systems change. We focus on how rights and opportunities and resources are being unjustly distributed and what can be done to change that distribution. And what can be done often is a consulting or systems level intervention recommendation that the students then write up and in response to a case study, a role play simulation, or maybe even a live practicum experience. So really quickly, some other activities I think many of us use is we use, there are interprofessional practice training, there's courses, there's, a lot of times there's group assignments that we use in our classes. But there's also, consulting projects and some great case study opportunities to get the students to really chew on these concepts and practice them in a safe enough environment. So there is a Google Doc in here that actually I will put in the chat once my presentation is done, that actually does give you an example of a case study role play of interprofessional collaboration that we use, and we piloted originally with our MPH program and our MSN program. And it also includes in that, it includes a way to assess and evaluate socially responsive competency development as a consultant and interprofessional team member. Other methods for outcomes really can be outlined in Caslow. She in 2019 developed this really wonderful evaluation of different ways that we can evaluate our competency and what is most effective in terms of how we do that. There's also a number of interprofessional skills measurements and tools that we can use and adopt. But primarily what I end up using is I end up using a lot of activities related to self-awareness. So to build self-awareness through reflection papers on social identity, bias, prejudice, and internalized notions of superiority, as well as consciousness raising activities about, having my students summarize interpersonal, cultural, institutional, structural forms of oppression, as well as within a team that you see it replicated, and then manifestations of system-wide inequities. So very similar to the ISM paper, it's a lot of looking at a example case and then trying to really break out what are the oppressions that are being replicated and demonstrated. And finally, giving a voice or sharing power activity can look something like doing a SWOT analysis, so completing a diversity and inclusion and sharing of power specific SWOT analysis. So that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, or challenges related to a team experience or consultation activity. And I pull from Arredondo in terms of some questions related to representation, as well as communication practices. So this slide, I'm not going to go through in more detail because it's actually in the Google Doc I'll share, that basically is a role play simulation it gives you the actual simulation, and then it talks about the debrief activities that are both questions and discussion and written review that the students are then evaluated on, and includes, again, a SWOT analysis and a cultural competency self-assessment. So that's it for me. I hope that leaves enough time for Brenda to go ahead and step in, and I'll put the link to the Google Doc in here.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it. Now the illustrious Dr. Nash.
Illustrious. Thanks for that, Jude. Okay. So I'm going to pick it up from here and sort of bring in the supervision piece. And I guess just so I didn't have this in my slides. I didn't think about it until I specifically was listening to Megan and Jude. But so my sort of, what I bring to this piece of the puzzle is that I teach our supervision class. And so what I'm going to talk about, I think, is both important in terms of those of us who are supervisors, but also in terms of how it is we teach our students to become supervisors. And one of the things, I guess I should also say, I'm at Spalding University in Louisville, Kentucky. Just took over the chair role there July 1, so very new to that role. And my head still spins from all the things that I need to learn to do this job well. But I also still teach in the program, and I teach our supervision class. And the way our supervision class is set up is that we actually, so we have 3 levels of therapy practicum, 3 years each. And so our advanced therapy students actually peer supervise our beginning level therapy students for, we're set up on a semester system, so for an entire spring semester. So essentially the folks who are applying for internship in the fall and then going off on internship that next year are our advanced students and their peer supervising folks that are in their very first practicum experience. So it's a 3-hour course, but we split it up 2 hours one semester, 1 hour another semester. And I meet individually, not individually, I split up the class in half, sometimes individually, split the class up in half, and we meet every other week so that I have smaller groups. And then after some sort of initial didactic, theoretical pieces at the very beginning of the semester, then we meet every other week, almost like a practicum supervision group, but it's a supervision of supervision group. And so that's sort of the structure of the class through which some of these ideas and things that I'm going to be talking about comes from. So in Carlsbad this past January, we obviously had the working group that was tackling how do you infuse social responsiveness into the supervision competency, and the essential sort of element that I think came out of that working group was that supervisees really have to have the basic knowledge of and sensitivity to the issues related to individual and cultural differences as they apply to the supervision process and relationships. So just like in every other competency domain, it applies here in supervision as well. So from that, what do folks need to know? And I would say this, again, this is both through the lens of what does the supervisor need to know, and also what does the supervisor need to make sure that the supervisee knows. So obviously the APA multicultural guidelines is a huge piece of the knowledge base, along with the APA guidelines for clinical supervision. We want folks to have at least basic foundational understanding regarding individual and cultural differences. So again, you know, the students that I'm teaching are advanced students, so they've had our 2 multicultural courses, as well as lots of other courses that have helped them understand individual and cultural differences. We want folks to be aware of oppression and privilege, both systemically, how that shows up in places and spaces, but also how it shows up for them as human beings navigating the world and navigating their role as a therapist and a supervisor. We want supervisors to ensure that their supervisees, that whenever they're talking about cases, whether it's a formal case presentation in a class or it's a presentation of a case in one-on-one supervision, that there is always consideration in that conversation or in that presentation around individual and cultural differences, that's not something that just comes up if there's an issue, but it's something that is always considered in the context of the work that's being conducted. And then we want folks, this came directly, almost a quote out of the matrix from the work in January, but that we want folks to identify at least 2 personal factors that will influence the course of therapy and or the course of supervision. And then in terms of their work with clients, the potential impact of that on diagnosis and treatment, right? So really just thinking about what personal factors do I bring that is gonna have an impact. We'll talk more about that. So this is straight out of the multicultural guidelines. If you haven't seen this, it's kind of embedded in the back, but it's really a powerful sort of visual for understanding. I almost pointed at the screen like you all could see what I was pointing at. It's a powerful visual of, so like if you look at the 2 inner circles, the ones that kind of look like bifocals or whatever, you know, you see that they're 2 individuals, right? And they're bidirectionally influencing each other. So there's the client and the clinician, or the student and the educator, right? So we know that there's this relationship where people are influencing each other, right? And so then as we build out in that ecological model, right, all of the systems that surround both the individual, but that also surround the relationship of these individuals, right? So the community and the school and the family context that they each bring into this relationship. And then, you know, the institutional level impact and the climate, whether it's domestic or international or human rights, right? So all of that impacting both on each individual and also on their relationship. So this is important to understand when we're thinking about, you know, working with anyone, but particularly someone who is that we have differences with in any domain, right? And so to understand that I am this way, or I have this belief system, or I have this piece of privilege or oppression, and you have yours, right? And how we learn to navigate that. So we understand that in terms of multiculturalism, but here's the spin that I sort of put on it in terms of supervision. That supervision is not a dyadic relationship, but it's a triadic relationship. And so all of those things that we see here actually also show up here, but it's not 2 people, it's 3 people. And so we're used to talking about the relationship of supervisor and supervisee. And we're used to talking about the relationship of supervisee and client. The thing that we often don't think about is it's not really a relationship, but it's still an influencing perspective of supervisor on client, right? And so how I am working with my supervisee on their work with the client is also coming through my lenses and my biases about the client, right? And so as a supervisor, I also have to understand that relationship, for lack of a better word, and how that's showing up in my work with my supervisee. And then obviously that, just like in the dyadic relationship here, the triadic relationship, supervision, still also within all of those ecological systems, right? So this takes a lot of intentional thinking, intentional self-reflection, encouragement of supervisee to have that self-reflection so that clients aren't adversely impacted. So this is just a little exercise that I've actually done this with supervisees in one-on-one supervision, but also in class. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list of social identity places. But to have people, so if you think of that, the first sort of column there, right, that could be like a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 or whatever. And so I ask folks to put like just a hash mark on the line as to how they identify along the dimension of oppressed versus privileged. And then to give that just sort of their own self-label, like what does that mean to them? And it never ceases to amaze me when we get to the end of this exercise and do some reflecting and sharing, the meaning that the insight that people have just out of giving labels to their awareness of where they are on this continuum of oppressed versus privileged. And so this sort of builds self-awareness, and then we can use this as something to reflect back on as they're doing ongoing supervision work or clinical work. Because again, this is about being a supervisor working with supervisees, but also supervisees working with clients, right? So then when I'm the supervisor of the beginning level supervisors learning how to work, right? So it's helpful to be able to reference back to this to help understand where there might be differences and where there needs to be conversation or enhanced self-reflection or additional discussion in supervision. So kind of in a nutshell, what does all of this mean, or what do we do? So I think it's important, getting back to, we've talked several times here now in this presentation with all three of us about power and privilege. And so I think it starts with the supervisor. So the supervisor has to own sort of their social locations, their social identities, their dimensions of privilege and oppression. and where that comes from for them. Almost like the isms exercise across multiple domains. And then to work to acknowledge the power and the privilege of their identities and to minimize that where possible, right? So obviously being a supervisor or teaching students to be supervisors, there is inherent power in that role, right? There are responsibilities with that role, but where that can be minimized, it should be minimized to allow for that more collaborative relationship. So the supervisor sort of starts this process first, models this for the supervisee. The supervisor intentionally creates that brave space, which we all know is not necessarily a comfortable space, but a space where supervisees can genuinely reflect on their own personal dimensions and the history and the context of that, so that they can be more aware of what it is they're bringing into the supervisory relationship, of course, also into their client relationships. The supervisor acknowledges and respects, of course, the supervisee's locations, experiences, identities, and really sort of encourages their self-reflection on how those identities are showing up with clients and also in supervision. Supervisor and supervisee both acknowledge the client's locations. So there's this nice sort of parallel process of what's happening in supervision also then happens with the client. And then supervisee, again, has to ensure that all client conceptualizations, diagnosing, intervention strategies, that all of those are done mindfully, paying attention to both the supervisor's lens, the supervisee's lens, and the identities and intersectionalities that the client has as well. So that's what I have. Yeah, I feel like I went through that quick, but I think we're all open to questions and thoughts at this point.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Brenda. Excuse me. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Megan. So now I think we've got, it's number one, a miracle that we have 3 psychologists and we're still pretty much on time with our talk. So well done. So open it up to questions and thoughts, reactions and sharing. Yeah, Cheryl.
Thank you all. I thought each presentation was wonderful and excellent, and I appreciate the ability to immediately apply some of what you've shared with us. I'm curious about, I think, Brenda, it was your presentation, you know, the continuum of identities and privileged versus oppressed. One of the things that has come up for us recently is within group differences around where people feel they fall on the continuum, and how that impacts how they're experienced by their peers. So one example is a student in our program who happens to be Jewish. And so she is very, very much identified with that identity and feels more connected to students of color and their experiences and being marginalized. And so everything is about context, right? And everything is relative to everything else. And so I think she beautifully shares how and why she identifies in that way. But some of her peers have had very strong negative reactions to that. And so I'm just wondering how you navigate when people's self-perceptions conflict with how the world kind of views them, if you will.
Sure. Great.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in the context of my work in teaching supervision, I steer that back to their work with their supervisee. And so, and then if it's impacting the supervisee's work with the client, so if how they're identifying is showing up in their relationship with their peer supervisee, then we got to figure out how to work that, right? And so, you know, again, honoring how people feel, but also having that space, again, that brave space to talk about, okay, but this is how it's showing up and this is how it's impacting your peer supervisee and your relationship with them. And so I think that that's just an individual sort of conversation there. Though the bigger issue that I hear in your question is like, it's more like their presence in the program. So not just their presence as they're learning this new skill, but it's their overall sort of presence. And so the only way I would know to handle that is for an advisor or a mentor or somebody to try to have a one-on-one conversation with that person to both honor how they feel and help them see, and this is showing up in a way that is impacting the relationship with your peers.
Yeah, and it's so complicated because, you know, you're talking to a person from another marginalized group with a horrid history, and so it's complicated. But no, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
It sure is. It sure is.
Great question. Others? Any thoughts about or questions for presenters?
Jude, I had a question for you that was in the chat, but when the students pick their ISM, do they do any reflection on why they pick their ISM and how does that show up?
Yeah, we do students have already kind of socially located themselves, Brenda, similar to what the exercise that you had. So they've already done that work. And as part of that work too, Cheryl, I have them kind of talk about how they internally identify, but also how they're externally perceived. And for better or for worse, it's a little morbid, but I use this metaphor of a code, like a code scanning thing. Like, you know, if you go to the store, on every product, there's a scanner with all those lines. And I actually identify each of those lines as where they position themselves, agent or target. And I say, basically, as you move through the world, however I want you to see me, you know, as this put together guy named Jude or something, we all know it's not true. And I mean, I walk somewhere and people just, you know, they naturally just kind of scan us quick, and that's what they move from. And that can be difficult when we're talking about different target ranks. But Brenda, folks, usually the ISMS paper is a form of what I call me search, where the student sort of wants to assert their target experience as the push or driver for the paper. And I encourage them not to do that. And I also encourage them to make sure that if they choose an ISM, that they can academically substantiate that ISM. And so that ISM needs to be accompanied by some pretty clear, metrics, if you will, of disproportionality and discrepancy. And so while folks might want to choose an ISM or term one, where they might feel a little marginalized or discriminated against, that won't be, it won't stand up in a way to the ISMS paper. Thanks, great question. Other thoughts, questions?
Jude, this is Andy Rowan from Region. I liked with your ISM paper how you had a requirement for them to pull in some of the scholarly literature and the academic literature. I was kind of curious though if people have ever picked an ISM and a system and gone in and as they examined it, maybe they were surprised that the literature and the research didn't support the presence of oppression for that group in that system and how that is handled. Because it sounds like your paper says you got to find it kind of thing.
That's right, Andy, great question. And yeah, so part of my diabolical plan with this paper is also they might know that there's an ISM that obviously exists and manifests itself in a system. Then they go to the literature and discover how no one is saying that it really is. It's kind of a academic gaslighting, if you will, or something like that. And I want to bring that up to my students, that even though we know something's existing in a system, no one is writing about it. And the question then is why? So I have them do a research log before that paper and make sure they identify the keywords and the databases and things like that, so they can track why there's a gap in the literature. And a lot of our students then, their dissertations actually are born out of this ISMS paper idea, because they're passionate about something and they realize that there's a major gap. But in the frame of kind of colonization, if you will, then the big question I have students ask is, why is there a lack of literature on this topic and who benefits from it?
Jude, Michael's hand is up for comment.
Yeah, Michael.
Hey, Jude, I didn't hear your presentation because I was late. My apologies.
Yeah, no problem.
But in response to Brenda, how do you, or do you find you even have the time in a supervisory context, have time to address the transitory nature of some of the social constructed identities? Or maybe the developmental, from a developmental psychological model, how maybe one social identity that's constructed during childhood is incongruent with a later adult identification?
Yeah, I don't know that it often goes into that much depth. I think they do shift and change over the course of the year, of course. And so, I mean, there's self-reflection and there's sharing and there's processing of that. But almost always within the context of how that's showing up in their relationship with their peer supervisee. So I do try to set it up at the beginning of the class to really sort of structure them to keep the focus on that role, so that even though they're sharing personally, they're not sharing personally, if that makes sense, right? It's how their person stuff shows up in that role, but we're not just talking about their person stuff. And so I think that just feels right to me, because how they show up personally is important, and we do have to talk about that. But I also don't want to go digging in too deeply to that personal stuff, because that's not my role, right? So I feel like because I set that up at the beginning, that it often doesn't get that far in our discussion.
Great. So we've got a couple more minutes. I can follow up a little bit, Michael, with your question, if that's okay, about the developmental stages. I try my hardest to incorporate a developmental context within that process of identification. And so when we break up these different identity domains, and I use these phrases of kind of agent or target in each of those, then I talk about the development of agent awareness and progress, or target awareness. And so I'll use, we work from a couple of like privilege awareness models. And there's a lot of great like racial identity models, right, that came out in the 90s that are really focused towards target stuff. But there is hardly anything out there around our agent domains and how we progress. There's some, but not a lot. But when I present those, what I appreciate about it is it just normalizes the process, and it doesn't have folks feeling like somehow they're morally or ethically bad. It's more like we all don't just go from not woke to woke. There's some process in there that we go through, and I'm always searching the literature to find better articulation of that, because I think it helps students kind of open up and then develop a storyline of this is where I was, this is where I am, and here's where I want to go.
I think that can be particularly challenging right now. I think that marginalized groups don't have a lot of patience for the journey, if you will. And so I think one of the hard things, particularly for faculty members teaching diversity courses, is how to honor the rawness of the moment, but still keep the classroom context kind of safe and sane. And safe is relative, right? But it's a very difficult time for teaching culture and gender courses
For sure.
right now. So
For sure. What a great point, Cheryl. Thank you. Well, it looks like we're at time. I want to honor that. So thank you all for joining us and participating. Thank you, Megan and Brenda, for presenting. And we'll see you at the next one, I think. Sounds good. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.